The Smiths lived in a quiet suburban street, the kind of place where neighbors waved over hedges and children rode bikes without fear. Their house was modest but well kept, with a garden that bloomed in orderly rows of tulips and daffodils every spring. From the outside, nothing seemed out of place. The family, Mark and Lisa Smith, along with their two children, Emma and Jake, was the picture of contentment. Mark was a manager at a small accounting firm, Lisa taught at the local school, and the kids were bright, playful, and full of energy. Their life was predictable, safe, and, unknown to them, meticulously observed. David Crane arrived in the town on a crisp autumn morning. He drove a sleek black car that gleamed under the weak sunlight, and his first steps on the neighborhood street were careful yet purposeful, like a chess piece moving into position. He was new in town, at least officially, though his eyes betrayed a restless calculation. He greeted neighbors with a friendly smile, a firm handshake, and just enough charm to make anyone feel they had known him for years. Within days, he had befriended the Smiths under the guise of a new neighbor looking for advice. From the very beginning, David displayed an almost uncanny ability to read people. He remembered Mark's favorite coffee, complimented Lisa on her garden choices, and even recounted a shared interest in classic movies with the kids. To the Smiths, he seemed thoughtful, considerate, the kind of man who could be trusted without a second thought. But the audience, watching closely, could see the cracks beneath the surface. A lingering glance at their home office, the subtle interest in family photos, the almost imperceptible smirk as he listened to Mark talk about financial successes. These small details painted a far darker picture than the one he presented. David's integration into their lives was seamless. He offered to help Mark with his personal finances, ostensibly to double-check the investments after overhearing a concern about a risky venture. Lisa welcomed his input on her home budgeting, and even Emma and Jake found him endlessly entertaining during weekend visits. He brought gifts, small tokens of friendship, a rare book for Mark, a bouquet for Lisa, a model airplane kit for Jake. Each gift, each interaction was carefully measured to deepen the family's reliance on him. It was during these subtle acts of ingratiation that David began the real work. He wasn't just a charming stranger, he was a predator mapping out vulnerabilities. He noted the Smiths' bank statements with casual interest, casually discussed insurance policies, and asked leading questions about property ownership. Always polite, always helpful, always just curious enough to avoid suspicion. One evening, as the Smiths gathered around their dinner table, laughter and warmth filling the room, David asked a seemingly innocuous question. "Have you ever thought about diversifying your investments? I've seen families lose everything because they trusted the wrong people." Mark, caught off guard, chuckled and brushed it off. Lisa smiled, dismissing it as a general observation, but the audience felt the weight of the statement. It was a seed, a whisper of the chaos to come. The tension slowly mounted over the following weeks. Strange occurrences began to ripple through the Smiths' lives. A missing bank statement here, a misplaced check there. Emails from their financial institutions ended up in spam folders, bills arrived late, and minor discrepancies appeared in their accounts. Each incident by itself could be dismissed as a mistake or coincidence, but the pattern was unmistakable, and David, ever the invisible hand, ensured it remained unnoticed by the family. One rainy afternoon, Mark noticed a file missing from his office desk. It contained tax documents and account passwords, nothing out of place to anyone else, but the absence prickled at his instincts. He asked Lisa if she had moved it, and she shook her head. Emma and Jake were oblivious, preoccupied with school projects. David, visiting that same day, offered a helpful suggestion. Perhaps it fell behind the filing cabinet. These old offices tend to swallow papers without warning. Mark nodded, comforted by the explanation, though a small nagging doubt lingered in the back of his mind. By now, the audience could see the duality of David Crane, the amiable neighbor who joined family barbecues and movie nights, and the calculating predator meticulously dismantling the Smiths' world. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made was designed to deepen trust while positioning himself closer to their vulnerabilities. A pivotal scene unfolded on a crisp Saturday morning. The Smiths were planning a small celebration in their backyard. Mark was setting up a barbecue while Lisa arranged flowers, and the kids were chasing each other around the garden. David offered to help with the grill, ostensibly to avoid the smoke, and moved through the space with careful observation. His eyes lingered on the study window, where financial documents sometimes lay unattended. He smiled warmly at the children, his tone light and jovial, yet his mind worked like clockwork, cataloging each weakness, each opportunity. That night, as the Smiths gathered for dinner, they were oblivious to the danger that had already wormed its way into their lives. David Crane sat at the head of the table, a charming, disarming presence, laughing at Mark's jokes and complimenting Lisa's cooking. The camera, or in the audience's imagination, the narrator's gaze, lingered on his eyes, sharp, calculating, a predator concealed beneath a mask of civility. The chapter closed with an unsettling foreshadowing. David leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and murmured, almost to himself, "It's amazing how much you can take from someone when they trust you completely." The line was soft, almost casual, but it carried the weight of impending doom. The Smiths smiled, unaware of the danger perched so close to their hearts. The audience, however, knew. The storm had arrived, invisible, yet unstoppable, and their world was about to unravel. The Smiths awoke one Monday to the first undeniable signs of catastrophe. What had been small, dismissible anomalies now revealed themselves as a coordinated unraveling of their lives. Mark's bank accounts had been drained, dozens of transactions vanished into thin air. At first, he thought it was a banking error, an impersonal mistake, something that could be reversed with a phone call. But when he called, the bank's voice on the other end confirmed his nightmare. The accounts were empty days ago. Every paycheck, every savings deposit, every carefully planned emergency fund, gone. Lisa found herself staring at her credit card bills, aghast. Purchases she hadn't made, payments she hadn't authorized, all linked to unfamiliar locations and dates. Her stomach churned. The credit institutions were helpful but firm. Without proof of fraud, nothing could be reversed. Panic began to seep into the household, threading its way through their daily routines like a cold, invasive fog. The children sensed the tension before the adults even acknowledged it. Emma sat at the breakfast table poking at her toast, while Jake avoided eye contact altogether, fiddling with his cereal bowl. "Mom," Emma whispered, her voice trembling, "what's wrong with the money?" Lisa forced a smile, hiding her fear. "It's just a small problem, honey. Nothing we can't fix," she said, though even she wasn't sure that was true. Meanwhile, David Crane remained calm, the eye of the storm. He visited the Smiths under the pretense of concern, offering advice that masked his culpability. "You have to act quickly with cases like this," he said softly, almost as if rehearsing sympathy. "The people who do this, they're careful, but with the right steps, you can recover, if you know where to look." Mark clutched at the words, desperate for guidance, unaware that the man giving it was the architect of their ruin. Over the next week, the destruction became more personal. Their house, once a symbol of stability, was threatened by foreclosure notices they didn't understand and couldn't afford. Friends called, some offering support, others awkwardly backing away, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster. Gossip and judgment crept into their social circle. The Smiths, once respected and admired, found themselves isolated, their reputations silently tarnished. Detective Ramirez entered the narrative quietly, a shadow in the background at first. He had been tracking financial crimes in the region for years, following patterns that many overlooked. Something about the Smiths situation piqued his instincts, a signature of manipulation, a trail that spoke of sophistication and planning. Yet he was stymied by the lack of direct evidence. David Crane had covered every trace, left no fingerprints, no witnesses, no digital breadcrumbs that could be conclusively linked to him. Ramirez's frustration was palpable, but so was his determination. He could feel, somewhere deep in his gut, that this case was different. As David's plan unfolded, the family's emotional world collapsed around them. Mark, once composed and methodical, grew irritable, snapping at minor inconveniences. Lisa, the nurturer, found herself questioning every relationship, every decision she had ever made. Emma and Jake retreated into themselves, their childhood innocence tainted by the creeping fear that their home was no longer a safe place. One evening, as Mark scoured his office for missing documents, he realized that his personal ledger had been tampered with. A careful inspection revealed subtle alterations, numbers rewritten, accounts redirected, balances shifted. The implications hit him like a punch to the chest. This was no random act. It was methodical, premeditated, and personal. He wanted to scream, to call the police, but even that felt futile. How could he explain the impossible? How could he prove that the charming man who had shared jokes and birthday cakes with his children was the very person dismantling their lives? David, of course, was always present, or at least always nearby. He offered small reassurances, subtle nudges in the right direction, while his eyes constantly scanned for new opportunities. He had orchestrated the perfect scenario. The Smiths' trust was his weapon, their ignorance the perfect shield. And now, with the accounts drained and their social lives in disarray, he had achieved the ultimate leverage. The tension reached a dramatic peak when Mark attempted to confront David. It was a Saturday afternoon. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the Smiths' front yard. Mark asked David to meet in private, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "I need to know what's going on, David," he said, trying to mask panic with anger. "I need answers." David's response was a study in calm deception. He smiled, a practiced tilt of the lips, and spoke slowly, deliberately. "I know this seems overwhelming, Mark. It's complicated, but I've been looking out for you. I promise we can fix this. You just need to follow my guidance." His tone was soothing, almost paternal, and it worked. Mark's suspicion wavered, swallowed momentarily by relief that someone seemed to have a solution. By the end of the week, David vanished, not abruptly, not dramatically, but quietly, like smoke slipping through fingers. A note left on the Smith's kitchen counter read simply, "I'm sorry, I had to move quickly. Trust the process." There was no forwarding address, no phone number, nothing but a chilling sense of abandonment. The family's world was shattered, their lives in tatters, and the audience was left with the stark realization the predator had struck, and the victims were powerless to stop him. The aftermath was merciless. The Smiths faced mounting debts, legal threats, and social humiliation. Banks refused to cooperate without irrefutable proof, which they didn't have. Neighbors whispered behind drawn curtains. The children's school life became complicated as other parents noticed the sudden decline in appearances and confidence. Emotional tension intertwined with financial devastation, creating a multi-layered collapse. And somewhere in another city, David Crane observed the fallout from a distance. He wasn't gloating, at least not openly, but the faintest smirk touched his lips as he flipped through a list of his acquisitions, accounts, properties, secrets. Everything he had planned, executed with ruthless precision, was exactly as he intended. He had taken it all from them, and for years, no law, no authority, no one would be able to touch him. The audience, meanwhile, was left with a powerful mix of horror and fascination. The calm, cheerful man they had seen at dinner tables, birthday parties, and neighborhood gatherings was now revealed as a master manipulator and thief. The tension was electric. If David could orchestrate this without detection, what could possibly stop him? And more importantly, how would justice ever catch up with a man so careful, so... Years passed, and the town that had once known the Smiths began to forget the sharp sting of their downfall. Life moved on, as it always does, but for Mark, Lisa, Emma, and Jake, time did little to heal the scars. Their trust in people had been fractured beyond repair, and their home, once warm and full of laughter, carried an echo of betrayal in every room. They had learned caution in its harshest form. Trust could be weaponized, and a single misstep could ruin everything. Meanwhile, David Crane had vanished from their lives with the ease of a shadow slipping into darkness. He assumed a new identity, Alex Thornton, and relocated to a bustling city several states away. There, he lived comfortably, blending into high society with a mix of charm, wit, and calculated discretion. His wealth, ill-gotten but carefully laundered, allowed him a life most could only dream of: sleek apartments, luxury cars, exclusive memberships, and the company of people who knew nothing of his past. David's days were methodical, almost ritualistic. He frequented the same cafes, attended charity events, and maintained a meticulously curated persona that left no trace of suspicion. Yet beneath the surface, he was always watching, calculating, anticipating. Every transaction, every new friendship, every fleeting detail was logged in his mind like a chessboard of potential moves. He thrived in control, and nothing gave him more satisfaction than knowing the Smiths were powerless, their lives forever altered by his design. The Smiths, on the other hand, struggled to rebuild. Mark had returned to work, though his confidence in managing finances was gone. Lisa took on extra hours at the school, burying herself in routine to keep anxiety at bay. Emma and Jake had grown quieter, more cautious around friends, more aware of the fragility of their world. The community had begun to forget the specifics of their fall, but the family carried it internally like a shadow that could not be shaken. Detective Ramirez never forgot. He had kept the case open, his instincts never allowing it to rest. Years of quiet investigation followed, almost invisible to the casual observer. He pored over minor financial discrepancies, followed faint digital trails, and interviewed small-time accomplices who had crossed paths with David in his various personas. Many leads turned cold, but Ramirez persisted, driven by a mixture of professional obsession and a deep-seated moral code. The first real break came when a former accomplice, someone who had aided David during his early schemes, reached out anonymously. The message was simple: he's living under another name. If you want him, start by looking for Alex Thornton. Ramirez felt a surge of adrenaline. For years, David had eluded capture with surgical precision. Now there was a thread, thin, fragile, but real. Ramirez moved cautiously. He knew David would be meticulous. Any overt attempted contact could push him further underground. Surveillance began, digital breadcrumbs were traced, and every transaction, social interaction, and public appearance was cataloged. Ramirez built a detailed profile: habits, likely routines, places of interest, even potential weaknesses. Every detail mattered. David, of course, sensed movement, subtle changes in the environment, people asking questions that could not yet be traced, the occasional hesitation in a routine. It all alerted him. He became more careful, more paranoid. Security cameras were avoided, digital communications minimized, and interactions with the public were measured and calculated. Yet Ramirez's investigation was precise, almost surgical. The tension between creditor and hunter intensified, a silent battle of intellect and instinct. Meanwhile, the Smiths were unaware of the approaching storm. They had begun to rebuild, but financial recovery was slow, and emotional scars ran deep. Mark hesitated to invest in anything substantial. Lisa approached new relationships cautiously. Emma and Jake had grown protective of their personal boundaries. The shadow of David's betrayal lingered over every decision.
The narrative shifted frequently between the two worlds, David's meticulously curated life, rich with comfort but fraught with tension, and Ramirez's relentless pursuit, a cat-and-mouse game of patience, precision, and strategy. Each near miss ratcheted suspense. A restaurant where David dined becomes a site of silent surveillance. A bank visit, carefully planned by him, is shadowed by Ramirez's team in the distance. Every interaction is a calculated dance, each side aware of the other, yet unable to strike decisively. Yet, then came the twist that reignited hope. The accomplice's information led Ramirez to an obscure pattern in David's transactions: luxury goods purchased in discrete installments, frequent flights to the same destinations, and old email accounts still active though dormant for years. Ramirez began to piece together a timeline, a trail of evidence that, if followed correctly, could finally lead to capture. David, however, remained a master of anticipation. He noticed the subtle increase in surveillance, the extra faces at cafes, the quiet cars parked across the street, the quiet inquiries into his financial history. He changed routines, adjusted schedules, moved assets quickly, and appeared in public less frequently. But Ramirez's net tightened slowly but inexorably. The tension reached a breaking point when Ramirez identified a major vulnerability: David's overconfidence. Despite years of careful planning, he had not accounted for the psychological persistence of someone who truly believed in justice. Ramirez orchestrated a situation to test this flaw, a staged opportunity designed to tempt David, a trap disguised as a profitable venture requiring his direct involvement. David could not resist. The lure of easy gain, coupled with his innate sense of superiority, drew him into the snare. Ramirez, watching from multiple vantage points, felt the adrenaline surge of years of preparation finally converging. Every minute was critical. Every decision David made could either secure his freedom once again or seal his fate. The audience by now is gripped by dual suspense. Will David slip away once more, leaving the Smiths forever trapped in their past trauma? Or will Ramirez finally corner the man who destroyed an entire family? Emotional stakes run high. The audience sees the Smiths' slow recovery, the children's tentative smiles, and the hope that justice, long delayed, might finally arrive. Part 3 closes with a powerful cinematic moment. David sits in his luxury apartment, a glass of aged whiskey in hand, glancing at the city lights below. He senses the walls closing in, a twinge of unease flickering across his composed exterior. Ramirez, unseen but omnipresent, is closing the distance, and the game is about to reach its climax.
The city hummed with quiet activity as David Crane, now Alex Thornton, moved through his sleek apartment like a predator in his natural habitat. Every movement was deliberate. A glass of whiskey set down, a check on investments, a glance at the skyline. Yet beneath his calm exterior, a tension he couldn't shake prickled at the edges of his consciousness. Ramirez was close. He could feel it, even without seeing him. Years of evasion, years of planning were suddenly threatened by a single relentless force. Detective Ramirez had orchestrated a meticulous trap, one built on patience, precision, and psychological pressure. Surveillance teams dotted the city, cameras on streets David frequented, unmarked cars tailing his movements, digital monitors tracking his financial transactions and communication patterns. Every thread of evidence Ramirez had painstakingly collected over the years was about to converge. The detective knew that David's downfall would not come from brute force, but from exploiting the one weakness that no one else could see: his arrogance. The plan was simple in theory. Ramirez arranged a meeting between David and a supposed investor, a trap designed to lure him into a public space under controlled conditions. The investor's pitch was irresistible: a high-return, low-risk opportunity perfectly tailored to David's greed and ego.
Ramirez knew that David, despite his caution, could not resist the thrill of such a calculated win. He thrived on control, on the illusion of invincibility, and this bait appealed directly to his pride. David arrived at the upscale cafe in the heart of the financial district, confident as ever. He wore a tailored suit, the lines sharp, the demeanor immaculate. The camera-like observation of the cafe seemed to flicker briefly in his peripheral vision, but he ignored it. He had evaded detection for years. Surely he could handle one more meeting. Ramirez observed from a nearby unmarked vehicle, his eyes sharp behind the rearview mirror. A small teen flanked the cafe, ready to move if David attempted to flee. The detective's heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. Years of tracking, years of frustration had led to this moment. He had seen the destruction David had left in his wake, the Smiths' lives shattered, their trust violated, and now he had a chance to confront the man directly. Inside the cafe, David smiled at the supposed investor, shaking hands with an air of practiced charm. He listened carefully as the opportunity was laid out. Projections, returns, guarantees. Every detail was plausible, designed to draw him in, and it worked. David leaned forward, intrigued, already calculating how to exploit the offer. His attention to the charts and figures was meticulous, his mind racing through possibilities. Ramirez waited for the critical moment. David, engrossed in the pitch, had not yet noticed the subtle signals from the surveillance team, eyes watching from across the street, a uniformed officer discreetly stationed at the entrance, cameras recording every move. The trap relied not on force, but on timing and precision. When David reached for the contract, Ramirez would strike. But David was not easily outwitted. His instincts, honed over years of careful evasion, flickered. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, scanning the room, calculating. Ramirez's pulse quickened. He had accounted for this. The subtle pause was exactly the opening he needed. With deliberate calm, Ramirez entered the cafe, his presence unassuming but commanding. He approached the table with measured steps, eyes locked on David. "Alex Thornton?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying authority. David looked up, feigning surprise. "Yes, and you are?" His tone was polite, but his eyes sharpened, a flicker of recognition passing through them. "I'm Detective Ramirez," the detective said, showing his badge with a slow, controlled motion. "We need to talk." The cafe seemed to shrink in that instant. David's mind raced, assessing escape routes, calculating angles, weighing the odds. For the first time in years, he felt the constriction of true danger, not a digital trail or a cold lead, but a man who had anticipated him, studied him, and now confronted him directly. David's charm remained, but it was tempered by caution. "Detective, I'm afraid you've made a mistake," he said smoothly, standing. His movements were deliberate, measured, every step designed to buy time. Ramirez remained unshaken. "There's no misunderstanding, David. Or should I say, Alex. You've spent years taking from innocent people. It ends today." His tone was firm, unwavering. David's eyes flicked to the exit. The doors were visible, but the surveillance team blocked all potential escape. Every angle was covered. His mind raced, every contingency, every plan he had ever executed, now confronted by the one person who had studied him longer, closer, smarter. For a tense moment, time seemed to stretch. The cafe hummed around them, oblivious to the psychological duel unfolding. Patrons continued conversations, servers moved between tables, the city outside went about its day. But at this table, predator and hunter faced off, each aware of the stakes, each measuring the other. Finally, David made a calculated decision. He couldn't escape, at least not without risking capture or exposure. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his hands. So, what happens now? His voice carried a hint of curiosity, almost admiration for Ramirez's precision. Ramirez responded without hesitation. "Now you answer for what you did." Two officers approached, each on each side, prepared to secure him. David's composure faltered only slightly, the first crack in a facade that had held for years. The arrest was smooth, professional, but the weight of it was immense. For Ramirez, it was the culmination of years of persistence and dedication. For David, it was the first true loss he had ever faced, a moment where intellect and cunning were insufficient to protect him. The story then shifted briefly to the Smiths, who had been informed of the arrest. Relief washed over them like a long-awaited tide, tempered by the years of trauma and loss. Mark exhaled, a mix of exhaustion and catharsis in his expression. Lisa hugged him tightly, feeling the release of a burden that had shadowed every decision for years. Emma and Jake, older and more wary than before, finally allowed themselves a moment of hope, the first flicker of safety in years. Ramirez oversaw the legal proceedings, ensuring that David faced trial. Every financial misappropriation, every manipulated account, every ruined life became part of the evidence meticulously documented over years. Justice, delayed but precise, was finally being served. In the courtroom, David maintained a calm exterior, but subtle signs betrayed him: tightened jaw, restless fingers, occasional glances toward the gallery where the Smiths sat. Ramirez observed closely, aware that the psychological impact of his capture was almost as significant as the legal consequences. The verdict was delivered after weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal maneuvering. David Crane, Alex Thornton, was found guilty on multiple counts: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and other financial crimes. The sentence was severe, reflecting both the magnitude of his crimes and the years of suffering inflicted on his victims. The final scenes focused on the Smiths reclaiming fragments of their lives. The home, once shadowed by fear and financial ruin, began to feel like a sanctuary again. Emma returned to hobbies she had abandoned, Jake regained confidence among friends, and Mark and Lisa allowed themselves moments of normalcy without the constant tension that had defined the past years. Yet the story did not end with blind optimism. Ramirez reflected privately on the nature of evil, the ease with which trust can be weaponized, and the resilience required to see justice served. The Smiths' lives were not unscarred, and the lessons learned were permanent. But the predator was caught, and in that victory there was closure. The camera, or the narrative lens, lingered as David was led away, a man who had once taken everything from a family and escaped for years, now finally facing the consequences. The audience was left with a lasting impression. Intelligence and charm can mask cruelty, but persistence, courage, and moral fortitude can eventually tip the scales towards justice.